All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another, in this case, a hope rollicking episode of Mondays with Mundy. And that's me, Jim Mundy, the historian for the Union League Legacy Foundation at the Union League of Philadelphia. All right. This is an election year. We're just a few weeks away. We'll all actually beginning now. We're all beginning to vote already for the next president of the United States. And as we've learned throughout previous episodes, presidential politics are playing a very important role at the Union League, if not in the country itself. And they're generally contentious. Ever since George Washington announced that he will not seek an additional term after having served two, the gloves came off. And American presidential elections have been anything but polite, pretty contentious, right? And maybe so at the League, as we've discovered and from the previous episode about American presidential elections. So what's going on? Well, the League was searching for its own political identity from the very beginning. And in the 19th century, it was home to both Republicans and Democrats. And as we learned in the previous episode on American presidential elections, in 1892, a substantial number of League members supported the Democratic candidate for president, Grover Cleveland, and he won that election. And that made a lot of other League members very unhappy, as you can imagine. And so the battle begins for the political soul of the League. And let's start with that one right there. So I'm going to share my screen. And we'll go to a PowerPoint. Oopsie daisy. Got ahead of myself here. All right. So here we are. To be or not to be? Politics in American presidential elections at the League, Part 2. All right. So it's 19. So as you've learned in the previous episode, in 1893, there was a special meeting of the membership to discuss the League's political identity. And members were asked to vote on whether or not they would insert the words Republican Club in the League's bylaws. The members turned that down, but they did pass this resolution that you see in front of you, that it is the sense of this League that it is a distinctively Republican organization, and that the directors ought not to admit any applicant not affiliated with the Republican Party and in harmony with its principles as recognized and supported by the League. And this was important because what the League had discovered in 1892 and 93 is that the League's charter did not allow the League to expel members for their political affiliation and for whom they voted, okay? All right, so let's move on. 1928, okay? The League is recognized as one of the country's most important Republican organizations, actually bar none, all right? And I cannot overestimate that enough. I mean, it is just, it lives, breathes Republicanism all the time. And that's important because, after all, remember, Philadelphia, coming up to this point in time, was the most important industrial city in the country. It was the workshop of the world. And the Republican Party, going back to the time of, actually, the Whigs, supported a protective tariff that was charged against manufactured imported goods from Europe, right? In this way, American manufactured goods and workers were protected. And since the League was the club of the Industrial League of Philadelphia at this point in time, and Philadelphia's industrial city, that's intrinsic to the League's, well-being, if you will. And the Republicans in 1928, again, on the platform of a protective tariff. So it's all pretty good. So on June the 15th of 1928, the League itself nominated Herbert Hoover and Charles Curtis for president and vice president. This was before the convention, all right? So those are their guys. And as you can see, the League is decorated in this photograph I from a newspaper, which is why it's a little grainy. The League had this electric sign on the third floor front bay window, Hoover and Curtis, 1928, Love of Country Leads. You can see underneath it the Union League shield, the American flag, and the Union League banner as well. So, and this was a political tradition going back to the League in the 19th century, this kind of illumination, if you will, all right? And the campaign committee inside the League was gearing up for the election. It did something for the first time that year that wasn't really done in American politics, and that is the League invited prominent Republican politicians around the country to come and speak to the League members at a series of luncheons throughout the fall. We're talking, important senators, governors, and things like that. So major Republican figures, all right? The League, the campaign committee also did something unusual for that time, and that is it invited Mrs. Hoover, Lou Henry Hoover, to come to a luncheon in October. 10,000 women from across the state of Pennsylvania descended on Philadelphia And quite a few of them got to actually have lunch with Mrs. Hoover at the League itself. So you can see the things the League is doing now to support the Hoover candidacy in 1928. Things are looking pretty good, aren't they? But they're going to get a little bit more interesting yet. So let's go to our next slide and see what makes them interesting. All right, this guy, okay, John Jacob Raskob, was born in Lockport, New York, German father, Irish mother, Catholic. All right, in the 1920 election, that's going to become a major campaign issue because the Democratic candidate was the governor of New York, Alfred E. Smith, former mayor of New York. But he himself was a Catholic as well. It was the first time a Catholic had run for office, presidential office, in American history. So John Jacob Raskob, who is he and why is he part of the story? All right. He graduated from business school as a young man, but at the age of 22 in 1901, he was hired by Pierre S. DuPont as his personal secretary. Pretty good stuff for a young kid without a college degree back then, and especially an immigrant kind of Catholic kid, if you will. And obviously, he had a good head on his shoulders and a good brain, because I'm sure DuPont wouldn't pick just anybody for that position. And keep in mind how important DuPont and the DuPont company were at this point in time in the American economy. Pretty important indeed. So, all right. So 1901. Okie dokie. And Raskob apparently was just the guy that the DuPont was looking for. And so in 1911, after DuPont becomes president, this is Pierre, DuPont company, he makes John Jacob Raskob the assistant treasurer of DuPont company. Just 10 years later after becoming his personal secretary. That's a pretty big leap for a young guy, if you will. So now he's in his 30s. And then in 1914, DuPont, that was the CEO, names Raskob as the treasurer of the entire DuPont company. So pretty big stuff for a little kid, if you will, from Lockport, New York, right? All right. So in 1918, just 4 years later, DuPont makes Raskob the vice president and treasurer, the vice president for finance and treasurer for the DuPont company. So now Raskob's really going to get his claws in the DuPont, if you will, and he convinces Pierre DuPont that DuPont company should buy shares of General Motors Corporation, or General Motors Company, which was formed by William Durant, and Durant is now in economic peril, if you will. He's going to go bankrupt, actually. And DuPont will now own that year 43% of General Motors Corporation, and so DuPont will become the president, and he will also make Raskob the vice president for finance and treasurer of the General Motors Company as well. Wow, neat stuff. Okay, and that's in 1918, all right? September 1919, guess who joins the Union League? You're looking at him, okay? All right. And everything's fine, all right? Raskob's a Republican. At least he says he was, okay? So what's going to happen next? All right, so it's 1928, right? The country's moving along. Raskob has done incredibly well in his positions at both DuPont and in General Motors. And he's one of the most important financiers now in the country. And he's at the corporate level, all right? So at the 1928 election, all right, July the 11th, 1928, Alfred E. Smith, the Democratic candidate for president, announces that he has appointed John Jacob Raskob as the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Think what that news did to the League that night. I mean, the minute those members found out, can you imagine what they were saying and what they were? I mean, it was. I can only. I wish I was a fly on the wall back then. It would have been fascinating to hear what they had said. So here we are, a Union League member, turning coat, all right, if you will, and becoming chairman of the Democratic National Committee. All right, pretty interesting stuff, isn't it? All right, and what would happen, Raskob? Absolutely nothing. All right, he just, he did everything he could to help Smith win the election. Of course, in that election itself, I mentioned earlier, it was pretty much foretold that Smith didn't have a chance, and he didn't, to be honest. The Democrats won in the very deep South, which they traditionally did, despite Smith being a Catholic. But Smith only won 88 electoral votes to Hoover's 444. It was a landslide. Smith lost horribly, but Raskob survived. Okay. Nothing else happened. But let's look at a little piece of interesting information, though. All right. This is Raskob's application for membership from 1919, and this is his handwriting. He filled this out himself. And you can see he lived in Claymont, Delaware, in what is now Archmere Academy. That was his house. He was the VP in charge of finance for DuPont Company and the VP and chairman of the finance committee for General Motors. As you can see, there are the clubs he belonged to, the Metropolitan Club in New York, which is an incredible club, very important club in New York, the Manufacturers Club here in Philadelphia, and the Wilmington Club in Wilmington. All right. And then the next line, what are your politics? Republican. Have you voted for the Democratic ticket, or have you voted the Democratic ticket for President of the United States? And if so, at what election? Yes, Mr. Wilson in his first campaign. I'll be darned. Okay. Maybe he's not a Republican after all. One can debate whether the reasons were good or bad to vote for Wilson in 1912, but here we go. So there were signs that maybe Mr. Raskob wasn't a firmly committed Republican after all. And in 1928, he proved it, didn't he? So now Raskob would remain the chairman of the Democrat National Committee until July the 2nd, 1932. Some of the things that let's go back to Smith. I forgot about something though. What were the ties that bound Smith and Raskob together? Well, the religion, obviously, number one, but number two, they were both anti-prohibition. They were Wets, right? The Republicans, Hoover was from a Quaker family in Iowa, right? And Hoover and Republicans were staunch prohibitionists, no alcohol and stuff like that. So, and I'm sure there were many other issues that bound them together, but those seem to be the two most prominent ones, at least that were perceived by people in the 1928 election. So at that point, in 1932, Raskob really didn't get along with Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was going to be the Democratic presidential candidate that year. And there were irreconcilable differences, and so Raskob simply resigned his position at that point in time. And he would go on actually to become very much an anti-New Deal Democrat, which was really unusual, and that's a different issue altogether. So what happened to Raskob at the League? Nothing. The League president, General William Price Jr., had suggested that Raskob resign, and that, to the best of his knowledge, resignation had never been turned down, and implying that, of course, if Raskob committed his resignation, it would be heartily accepted. But Raskob did not resign at that point in time. Actually, Raskob eventually resigned, but not until October 31st of 1938. So we'll get more into that in the next episode, because that will happen again. All right. So, and perhaps Raskob purposely picked Halloween as the date of his resignation from the Union League, but we'll never know, because he died in 1950 and he took that with him to the grave. So I hope you found this another unusual and interesting and somewhat perhaps even humorous episode on presidential politics at the Union League of Philadelphia. So thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have one more of these, just so you know, okay, before the election on November the 3rd. Hopefully it'll be equally interesting at the same time, okay? So thanks for joining us. Thanks to the Legacy Foundation for sponsoring these episodes. I hope you're enjoying them, having fun. After all, history is fun after all, all right? And everybody, it's still a little crazy out there, so stay safe, stay well, and stay healthy. Goodbye now.